Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to all. I'm particularly delighted to welcome today American poet, novelist, and essayist, Wallis Wilde-Menozzi. Wallis has been living in Parma, Italy, for more than 40 years. Living in two cultures pulled her out of popular narrations and propelled her into unexplored ground. Reading her work has been compared to discovering a phosphorescent-rich sea, still unnamed, waiting. I came to know Wallis through the Geneva Writers' Conferences. Welcoming someone from the time I was in Geneva takes me back 25 years when ArabWorldBooks.com first came into being. Founded in Geneva in March 1998, our mission is to highlight the ideas, the books, and the women and men who create them. The website is dedicated to enhance understanding between cultures. We believe that literature and art in general is the best conduit for such understanding in a manner that goes beyond traditional stereotypes. Tonight is our 9th episode in this international and Arab author series. Previous guests were Reem Bassiouni, Sylvia Petter, Hala Al-Badri, Susan Tebergen, D.L. Nelson, Nihad Cerise, Karen Leggett Aburaya, and Samia Mehres. All our episodes can be found on our YouTube channel. I'll be sending a link in the chat of tonight's episode if anyone is interested. Egyptian author Mohammed Tawfiq will host and moderate this discussion. Thank you all for participating and have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thank you, Amani. Welcome, Wallis. Let me just add that among the very good books that Wallis wrote are Mother Tongue, An American Life in Italy, The Other Side of the Tiber, Reflections of Life in Italy, and her most recent book, fantastic work, Silence and Silences. She's also published Toscanelli's Ray, a novel. Her essays and translations have won awards and been anthologized in Best Spiritual Essays, Granta, Major Ideas of the 20th Century. A collection of her work has been published in Italian. Welcome, Wallis. It's a great to have this conversation with you. We've been friends for many years, and I certainly consider myself one of your students. So let's start from the beginning. What motivates you to write? At what point in your life did you start seeing yourself as a writer?
Good question. There is a gap between seeing yourself as a writer and writing, and it probably is something. Certainly, when you're as old as I am, it changes, goes back and forth over time. I think I was interested in writing because I had an inner life, and I think I found outer uses of words quite disappointing or quite artificial. I think a lot of the things I heard I didn't think were very sincere or very personal, and so I think the writing was generated from something within. And I think as I began to write, partly it was the era, partly I grew up in the Midwest, and I don't think I ever thought of I didn't think of all the differences of women writers and men writers and women. But I also, as I began to think I might write, I never thought I would earn my living writing. I always thought I would do something else, like edit or probably most likely editing, or I did social work as well. And I would write as my real vocation, as my real work, but I didn't ever hook it up to the idea that I would support myself, probably because I was basically a poet. I never thought I would support myself that way. I thought I would write in complete freedom, which means it wasn't linked to publishing. I would be self-supporting in different ways. And you asked me when I thought I was a writer. When I realized I was a writer, probably there was a coming out in the sense of when I lived in America. As long as I lived in America, I wrote when I was in Italy, but I probably didn't see myself as being seen by others as a writer. It was probably something that came when I lived in Europe. And in terms of being supported by somebody who recognizes one as a writer, it was James Guild. He was in Switzerland. He was a Russian immigrant who lived in France and then went to America and then came back and founded a magazine in Lausanne. And I sent him some poems. His answer when he sent back was, we're sorry, and we're sorry to say, we're even ashamed to say, none of us know you as a poet, but we know we should know you as a writer. And that somehow, that probably was the deepest signal from somewhere else that that and I was writing, and the stuff I was writing was poetry. And so I'll read you a poem that in a way is your question. And it's called Once I Never Thought of Knowing. Once I never thought of knowing writers, people who filled pages with adventures, but more interesting inner life, hearing songs inside of the lilacs, penning phrases like, you must change your life. Now in most astounding freedom, I have shelves of books signed, not in shopping center malls, but by people whose ways I follow. Yet it was not knowing writers that changed me, nor knowing even that I could write, but knowing there were eternal ways. Words bring water to a desert.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I know how that feels. I have. I know certainly a good part of my bookshelves are written by writers I know, by friends. I know it opens up a completely different world. Of course, writing can be a solitary vocation. It is a solitary vocation at the end of the day. So tell us a little bit about your experience teaching writing. I've known you in Geneva within the context of the Geneva Writers Group, the Geneva Writers Conferences, and you were very generous in sharing your experience and expertise with others. How did this collective spirit influence your evolution as a writer? And how do you do this balance between the very solitary nature of writing and the collective and the wish to have a collective sort of spirit with other writers?
That's a nice question. I remember first meeting you there over. It was a wonderfly stimulating place to give support to people. I met Susan Tabergian, who started the Geneva Writers Group. We were going to Russia as writers who were part of a group that was looking to connect with Russian writers once Russia collapsed. It was 1991. And we became friends during those weeks. And I went back to Italy, she went back to Geneva, but we kind of committed ourselves to the fact that I would start to come up and help teach and help sort of organize what was already clear to her and which she had already had partly underway. So the group started in '91, and we were very committed to inclusivity, and we were interested in offering people who were uprooted, basically, who were managing different languages and different cultures, offering them some kind of place where they could exchange ideas, make connections, possibly figure out their voices. And then once it got started, we were able to bring in instructors. There was a very big commitment on the part of the committee to keep prices way within range of the people who wanted to write, which was also another very appealing element. Is once creative writing becomes something which is how a writer supports him or herself by teaching in a university, to get a writing degree can easily be $50,000 easily. And so in some ways it's self-selecting because a lot of people either can't afford it or they make great sacrifices to do it. But they're living in a very selective and in some ways highly competitive kind of environment, and to that extent professional. I think the Geneva Writers Group, and indeed most of the writing I've ever done in terms of teaching, although I have taught for Columbia, I have taught for Sarah Lawrence, the teaching I'm most deeply committed to is the helping people who have a story to write, who have something they want to do, who believe they could do it, but they're basically modest. Sometimes they're lacking technical ability. Sometimes they're just lacking confidence. Sometimes they're lacking input. I'm very much for the kind of writing programs where the costs are extremely low. The certification is not the thing. The doing is, the sharing is, the critiquing is. And so, and as I said, I find that very energizing. It's very different than teaching people who I have taught people and taken them to the end of a novel or the end of a book that's been published, but it's a different kind of exercise than basically getting people into the water of creativity, of literature, of believing that they have something they could say, and not necessarily sell, but say. And I think, I've always liked that kind of teaching.
Yeah. I like very much this idea of the writer's need to find their voice rather than to think of in terms of marketing a book, which is a completely different thing and certainly much more mundane than the actual creative part of it. You mentioned the going with Susan to Russia, the Geneva Writers Group, you, an American from the Midwest, spending many years in Italy. This whole multicultural, this whole diverse environment, we can see that. I mean, we can see that in works such as Mother Tongue or Silence and Silences, which is really which really deals with, brings the whole world into one one place, one book, one imagination. Yours is a fascinating journey, and a little bit of it we can see in your writing. Can you share some of the milestones of this journey with the participants tonight?
Some of the milestones in the sense of content, of figuring out what my subject was, maybe. I think if we go back to the fact that I knew I was a writer in some ways, but in other ways, I probably was, besides poetry, I was and I liked poetry because although it was made of words, poetry contained such silences, and poetry contained space for images without telling you what something meant. I could create something. It could be imaginary or it could be real, but it wasn't something that depended on exposition. So I think some of the milestones in terms of writing really came from when I lived in Rome, which was when I was younger and I wasn't married to an Italian. I lived a life that was, I would call a sort of just a bohemian, I don't know, an artistic life. Yeah, lots of different things happened and a lot of things went on. But once I really lived in Italy as an Italian, I think the issue of identity, the issue of literature, which literature, what literature, value systems. One system was extremely old and collective and had various forms of government. The other system was relatively new, completely focused on its own history, a history which indeed suppressed other histories. It was hard to tell those histories when you lived in America at the time. It was hard. So I think my sense of living in Parma probably, and the fact that the culture here was extremely rigid in some ways, not like Rome at all, which was international, a long history, a history which only wanted to tell itself one way. Is very, very hard to touch any of the icons as from Verdi to whoever. If somebody came in from the outside to tell the story a different way, they were quickly exiled or moved out, because every country, every place, probably in different ways, controls narratives. So that somehow became a big starting point for me, was just truth-telling. How do you tell it? Whose truth? Why is my truth the truth? It's not, how can I even talk about Parma and say that I know what it is? There was all of a sudden a multiplicity of angles and voices. There was a multiplicity of points of view. And if you were empathetic, it was easy to see other people's points of view and realize those still. However, there was some kind of a way that things didn't fit. So that, I think, was living in Parma and knowing we were basically be here. There was no internet then. There was, and airplane tickets were very expensive. It wasn't like you flew around just easily. And there were no English-speaking people here. So suddenly there were a lot of realities which suggested they could be explored or exploited or imagined. And so that was probably the beginning, or one of the bigger points of this cross section. And then immediately on the other side, living here, I'm trying to think of something like when we bombed Iraq, it was very easy to identify as people who were really against the American positions and looking at a falsity that really didn't take a lot of courage to explain or denounce. And so then there was the turning around in terms of one's own identity, but also what you were going to project as a person in that language. And in those years too, I remember going back to the States. I met Daniel Berrigan. I had met him in Parma, but then I met him there, and he sent me off to a peace march in America. There were only 20 people there. People had stopped protesting completely the war. So then it became more universal. You could look at a problem and say, it's our problem, it's their problem, it's a universal problem. And that was probably the second step in terms of me understanding what my subject was. It was going to be something that kept turning.
I think you put it beautifully, the tension that exists between societies being used to control the narrative, and then in the modern age, where societies find themselves from within facing multiple narratives. And it's also this, there's always this tension between the two elements that can be sometimes dangerous, but is always very exciting. In your latest book, Silence and Silences, you have described it as a prose poem and a silent dialogue. What do you mean by that?
Hey, have to read the book to understand. I think I finally, I was a person who never would have written a memoir. I didn't see my life that way, and it was because I was asked to write what it was like to live in Parma that I took up the job. But I kind of had to find my way and define the genre, because I didn't see anything out there that corresponded to what I thought could be done. Silence and Silences was a synthesis of understanding what I, at least, could understand about memoir, and what I could understand about narrative, which meant not just me telling the story, but letting other people in at all points, in terms of time, in terms of language, in terms of gender, in terms of, I could let in other voices, because, and so I could, in that sense, let other people tell bits of stories until we begin to feel, and in some ways it might have been like the Sufis. It certainly was like Dante in his poem, besides the fact that he introduces so many people and so many symbols, he uses language. So he'll take the same word and he'll turn it in its forms. And as it turns, the meanings turn and the motions turn. And in some ways, Silence and Silences, in a different way, was letting little stories, little details suddenly be pulled out and stand for something bigger, but basically leaving the space, not leaving the words, just saying, you make the connections, you see how the things fall. They won't fall the same for you as they fall for me. I think we're in an age, and certainly women can help in that, but we're in an age where the authority of a voice, or the authority of an author, so they tell you what everything is is kind of, we were kind of watching that disintegrate. And on the other hand, it's very clear that every voice does not have the same authority. Lots of voices are false, lots of voices are destructive, lots of voices aren't true. So it was trying to suggest all this, which means basically creating a sense of the unsaid. And in the unsaid, though, as you make the links with the stories that are told, which are personal stories, most people who've lived on Earth have personal stories, and they've never told their stories, and they don't show up on maps, they don't even show up in sentences, they don't show up, but giving this sense of this kind of infinite source of unknowing and unknown that we can discover or give space to a little bit. And so then me as a writer, me as somebody talking about my life, I have to give space to the fact that not like James Joyce, who says 24 hours, I'll tell you how many events are in there. That's an authoritative voice sort of hanging on to all of it. He's going to control the narrative. Mine is almost the opposite, which is I can't tell you about 24 hours. I can't tell you the unity of 24 hours. I can't tell you my unity. I can't, but I can create a composition that will suggest some of these things and suggest to you the infinite energy and beauty and unknowability of what we're in, this life.
Well, it's a fantastic idea. You mentioned James Joyce, and of course James Joyce, the central to James Joyce's work is language. He's basically, it's a journey into language, and in Silence and Silences, you mention that your awareness of silence itself changed with your experience of changing languages and countries. How do you reconcile the different cultural roots in your writing, and what is your relationship with language and place?
I think this final book, or this book, Silences, in a way, is that living in two languages, I realized that much of the self is built from language. It's built from cultures, it's built from value systems, it's built from history. And we keep refining it, and we learn different things, and we collect and put the things together and hopefully deepen and, grow in that direction. But on the other hand, there's something, whether we call it a soul or whatever it is, that isn't built. It's just there. And it's often, in my opinion, it's often hiding. We have to listen to it. We have to kind of coax it out. We have to give it some space. We have to give it some silence. And so for me, language, and I'm trying to think, Tim Parks and I exchanged thoughts on this, because somebody like Jahumpa Lahiri took up Italian at a certain point, and she writes in Italian and she translates herself. And I can't claim that I have the knowledge that Tim Parks does. Tim Parks has a real depth in terms of Italian. Mine isn't bad, but it's certainly spottier in the sense of I know certain literature, certain things very well. He's straight across the boards. And Tim was saying he would never write. He could write in Italian, but he wouldn't, because he feels his being, and he certainly lived in Italy a long time, his being expresses itself in English with all the extra beauty and depth and knowledge that has been added to it in Italian. But his language would be English, writing in English. And at any rate, I think in this case, everybody has a choice, but mine too has been to write in English, although I don't, what you're saying, because you translated yourself, I could translate myself for certain things. Probably some things I've read, like, I'm not sure I could. I don't know. But I do think that place instead, and I try to show it in Silences, place too is very concrete. And so it's built from details. And if we take something like a tree, even, the tree in Bronxville is in a storm. The tree that kills a woman in Parma has to do with climate change. The trees that Paolo describes that were planted after World War II in Parma were planted because the trees were burned because of the war. The book I describe, which is about the hidden lives of trees, it's describing how the root systems are disturbed by the sidewalks in Parma. There's a man who I'm talking to about something else, and he describes how his mother gave birth to him in a forest. She just lay down and he was born. Dante wakes up in the woods. And so each of these things, the way it goes through the book, it's a word, trees, but it's also a reality that's in many places and in many stories and in many different things. And the feeling going through it is, hopefully some of these things are united, either in our minds or in our memories, but it's the place then becomes this more fluid thing. Trees where? Trees here, trees there, trees is this, trees is that. I don't know if that explains much, but.
Well, that was fantastic. You mentioned, I mean, you deal with substance in a very profound way, and you use that in conjunction with the adjective fluid. But I noticed also that if we talk about form, the form of your writing, we can also say there's a certain fluidity there. I love your poems and your other writing, your memoirs and your other writing, but it's very difficult to make a clear-cut demarcation between them. There's a natural flow, not just in terms of substance, but also in terms of form. So with all this versatility in your writing, where do you come from in terms of literary tradition?
I don't know. I never took creative writing, so I don't know where exactly I come in that way. I think I like, besides writing that generates a lot of feeling, I like the philosophical novel. I'm interested in form. I like, in the Anglo-Saxon novel, I'm trying to think somebody like Tristram Shandy. He breaks up time. So for 45 pages, he's just coming down the stairs and his shirt is stuffed and caught in his zipper. And so Steppenwolf, Hermann Hesse, where he puts the magic theater in and somehow breaks up the illusion of that kind of thing. Always interested me. Just how do you imagine something but not claim, but at the same time remind people that it's an illusion. It's an attempt to suggest something that you'll believe. It's an attempt to suggest some aspect of reality, but it's not reality. It's not reality at all. And so probably that break, if Fontana is in my book, and he takes a slash and he slashes with the idea to suggest there's something inside, there's something outside, there's an interaction between the things. And that probably, that kind of mechanism interested me very much. And Virginia Woolf is somebody who does that. And a book like Orlando, where she takes on several centuries and she changes the sex of the person in the different centuries, and she shows the heavy cultural content and conditioning that comes about, which then, is an interplay. The fact that she writes, the last book she writes is called Between the Acts. And again, it's taking theater and a garden party and theater, and then how it's all generated. So she keeps breaking the illusion that you can just say it's this. She wants to keep saying it isn't it. There's reality. And she keeps saying that it's beyond words. It's beyond words.
Well, beyond words, yeah. Well, you mentioned Dante a few times, but in Silences, you mentioned. You really discuss the ideas of so many different thinkers and artists: Saint Augustine, Joan of Arc, Ibn Arabi, Shakespeare, Louisa M. Alcott, Moravia, Camus, Plato, Aristotle, Bruegel, Agnes Martin, and so on, and the list goes on and on. How does all this, all these, flow into your soul? How does this? How can you fuse all these different tributaries together?
Well, I guess I have to ask you. I think, I don't think we think about enough how we get the ideas we have, what we believe, what influences us on any one day, how our senses are stimulated. So we carry so much information, how do we, why don't I just write about the news every night and, put in, how do I know what to believe or how that touches me? I would have to describe it, but even then it would have to be contextualized. And so these books, I suppose, are things that we all read, and things touch us in different ways. And somehow, if you read enough books, they remain with you as little touchstones. Maybe they come in as a chime in something else, not that it takes up the whole of your identity. I'm not teaching it as literature. I'm trying to show how it's a part of us, not systematic either. That would be teaching, but it's a part of us. It touched us, and I suppose that takes us all the way back to why do we try to write?
Well, fantastic. I want to open up the floor for the others to participate. But before doing that, let me ask one general question.
Okay.
How do you see the state of the world now, what are the main issues of our time?
Well,
The state of the world.
kind of hard to sum it up. I think we see multiple sets of things where the narrative is changing, and one is climate, one is democracy itself, and whether these institutions can hold. Three are many aspects of human rights. Four, there's this tremendous kind of diversion between irrational kind of fundamentalist thinking and science, which is going in another direction. I think there are so many issues for which we no longer have a common illusion even of authority. We have, and we have with our internet and all that stuff, we have access to knowledge that we would never have. We also have access to stupidity and hate and opinions which have, which are manipulated, which are invented, which are driven by money in a way that's perhaps in some ways always existed, but never probably with the speed and intensity and amount of resources that are being poured into it. So I think we're living in a world where lots of things are not only in flux, we're being centrifugated. Things are falling apart. Things are being flung in lots of directions. Things need new definitions. Languages are hanging on for dear life. And we're being driven by messages instead of thought. We're being driven by signals. And so there's really a lot to do. And I think there's no single answer, nor is there any prediction of how we'll come out of all of it. I think, again, that's probably why I would propose silences. We've got to begin to think, not only recognize what we don't like, who we can't stand as a politician, why this should, but really, what are we in? And what are we going to do about it? And how can we help, even at the micro level, much less the macro level? What job can writers perform? All of that seems to me is in the question you ask, but I would have to be, I can be quiet in the sense of, I don't know. I think, we tend at the moment to be responding to events as they happen, like Ukraine. All of a sudden it's on our plate full time. Then there's wildfires. Then that's on our plate full time. Then we're and instead we really have to find this other level where we begin to talk and to listen and to find a proportion, I think, for what each individual is entitled to on the earth.
Things are falling apart. What a lovely way to sort of start the conversation with the participants. Let's start by a question that DL asked. What are you writing right now? What are we working on?
I'm back in poetry. Where it's a size I can handle, and I think I find that, for example, what we're talking about, Ukraine, for example, it comes into, because it's so dominating our life and yet we're not in the war. We're not making any, we personally, I personally am not making any huge sacrifices, so I can't take it on as a topic like that. But as an image, it suggests lots of things. It fits in domestic life. It fits in ordinary society, and certainly some of the uncertainties fit well. And so I'm, at the moment, as I said, I'm working on poetry.
Great. So guys, the floor is open. Comments, questions, ideas. Yes, A. Wild, go ahead. Please unmute. Could you unmute because you're muted?
Bon.
Good.
Sorry. I'm Alex Wilde. I'm Wallis's brother. So it's sort of, I feel a little bit uncomfortable in raising an early question, but your first question, Mohammed, you've done a brilliant job, I think, as an interviewer. I mean, you've drawn out some impossible and profound questions. But I'd like to go back to that first one, which is when people started to think of you as a writer. And Wallis actually will remember, I certainly remember, in mother tongue, that there's a wonderful story. Before she knew James Gill, before she went to Geneva, and when she first went to Rome back in the 1970s and was applying for a visa to stay in Italy. And the first person that called you a writer was the policeman, I guess, who interviewed you. I wonder if you could just share that story briefly. It's a lovely story.
Sure, that's in Tiber. It was
sorry.
When I went to Rome, I didn't have a work permit. Again, the tragedies of, you know, how we talk about immigrants now and illegal, it was a different era. And again, we could make other generalizations about why it wasn't hard for us in those times, but also you could live on nothing. But after a year of living in Italy without a work permit, it was the Vietnam War. There was a lot of demonstrations. The police were collecting people. I was told I should get a work permit, and so I had been teaching actually. But I was told I shouldn't say I was teaching, and one was often told, nobody will believe you if you say that, you know. And you know, so okay, what am I supposed to say? Well, why am I here in Italy? I'm a writer. So I went, and I had written a novel, but I went to the questura, and the man said, you know, how are you living here? And I said, I'm a writer. And at that point, art is so respected, basically, in Italy. It has such a tradition. He didn't ask how I was living on, making my money or anything. He said, oh, that's fantastic, of course. He said, here's a little pen, and it was a pen that you dipped in a pot of ink, and he gave me this thing, and he started dictating. It was really, I came to Italy because Italy is the land of artists and inspiration. It's the place not only of beauty, but of, and you know, we went on, and I had to see, you know, Roma, Città, Aperto, and of course Pasolini when he said, and we just kept writing, and I had 4 pages, and I got to the end of his dictation, and he said, and so I've come to Italy to write my novels. And at that point, I felt so nervous writing the whole thing, but I really felt nervous by that point. And I said, well, couldn't I just say 1 novel? And he said, no, you know, you have to stay, and otherwise you'll never be an artist. So we wrote novels, and he asked me to read it back, and we corrected the mistakes, the double letters that weren't right. he rushed off and he came back, and I thought I was going to probably be arrested. The Midwesterner in me was really feeling very nervous. And he said, 4 years, they've given you a 4-year work permit. And so I was officially there as a writer. And as I read it out, because I had to read it out loud to him because he liked it. He liked hearing it, and he'd go, bello, bello, oh, bellissimo. By the time I got done, it was true. You know, I kind of public declaration that I was a writer.
Wallis, did you ever connect with that policeman, especially after publishing The Mother Tongue?
I didn't, but it's a good idea. You know, it's a good idea. It was such a, it was an amazing experience.
We need to find him in Italy.
It's true. Let's do that.
So I don't have a question, but I would like to say what a thrill it is to have a friend who's a writer. Because every, I'm now emotional because every moment in our lives that was important, we got a poem from Wallis, and we have them all. So it's a gift to have a friend who's a writer.
It's a gift to have you guys as friends. Olga's an immunologist. She's the head of a department. She's really in the business of science. And Seth is a writer himself. Was a journalist and a person who taught communication.
You know, Wallis, as a scientist, as an immunologist, this last, the pandemic has sort of really taken away the kind of optimism that I had about the human race, because, I was thinking that with these big problems that you listed in response to the question, that every one of those problems requires us to get together on the solution. We couldn't even get together on a pandemic, which was so imminent, such an imminent danger. The climate change, it's still something that is happening, but it'll take a long time before, it's so imminent. But something like a virus, at least in this country, it became a divisive issue instead of an issue that gets us together. So if we could not conquer a virus with a vaccine ready in 11 months as a human race, I think that, the climate change and all these other very serious issues are just going to fester and lead to even further destruction. It's a really scary, it was a really scary example of where we are as a human race.
It's true. We need to find hope by listening to each other, as you said, by a strand that's not the individual, but that's the community.
Yeah, and maybe you mentioned, we are not. Maybe we should. It's very hard. Being led by a thought is a very individual thing, and we are. Some people are deep thinkers like yourself, and we decide on our next move based on considering everything. But there are a lot of people around the world who are led by a message.
Yes.
And so I think we need to find somebody, really a good writer, perhaps, to send a compelling message where people can unite behind.
Thanks, Olga.
Any other comments or thoughts?
Listening to these varied perspectives. Hello, Wallis. I'll see you in a week. I I see the connection with Wallis. I heard an expression that said, just when things are falling apart, they're actually falling into place. And I see you with that capability, but without allowing us to remember that it's ongoing. So I see you as the voice that she's looking for, but you don't allow the reality to go away. And I like that about you. I liked hearing you talk when we met, and I see that in your narrative too. So you do have that ability, but you know, no one voice can fix it all.
Of course.
So that's what we have to keep in mind too. You know, that's this combination of voices. So yours is
I think
vast.
that's the polyphony of any time, but of this time, there's so much talent. But as we look at the stories that are untold, we look at people, we look every night. At the moment, we're looking at Ukraine and the suffering, but the strength, the resources in terms of human abilities. I think we just have to look. There are going to be no answers, and there are going to be messages, and most of the messages are going to be wrong. It's going to, it's kind of, we probably have to live with a sense that there is unknowing, but that doesn't mean that we can just sit back and be happy that we're comfortable and we have air conditioning and we'll be fine for now. You know, every day counts. There's a lot to be done, whether you're a writer, an immunologist, or a parent, or there's a lot we've got to think through and understand.
It's the sharing in the unknowing that, and accepting it together, that I like about you.
So,
it's been a wonderful experience to hear the depth of this interview. I've had the privilege of hearing some of the others. And I was wondering, Wally, if you might have something you could read, because the poem was wonderful to hear. And maybe some people haven't been able to read whatever you might have available at the moment. Anything will be wonderful if you could.
sure, if we have a little, I'll read the one on, well, maybe I'll read this actually. I have in writing, as I said, I'm quite interested in having people tell their stories, because the more stories we would listen to, the more we would get out of the way, it seems to me, and we would also perhaps find more courage and more imagination. And I was teaching Nigerian I was receiving in Parma Nigerian women who were all illegal. They came in on boats and they were waiting for papers so they could become legal inside of Italy. And I thought writing might help them. And I'll just read you, because it speaks in some ways to words, to courage, to being torn up. The women in the class, in the lovely abandoned quiet of the library, named for a woman who'd been murdered in Somalia for her investigative journalism, responded to the photo of the refugee camp in an unexpected way. I was showing them pictures of Africa taken by a photographer. A level of silence we had never touched. It had been assumed, but excluded, suddenly found voice. The list of words I'd provided for an exercise in imagination became magnets for feelings and facts of untold months. Dusty road. The Sahara Desert, where I slept in dust like an animal, and my eyes burned endlessly because dust and sand blew into them. dark. It reminds me of Libya when I was in prison and needed all my courage not to give up. Thirsty. I was thirsty throughout my journey in Libya, most especially in the desert. I was so thirsty I drank dirty water and even begged under the hot sun to drink dirty water. Bare feet. I walked with bare feet in Libya when my shoes got spoiled. I continued on walking on stones, burning sand, and sharp gravel. Blue sky. Each time we saw blue sky in Libya, we always said that the weather was perfect for sailing to Europe. Red. Most times I think that red signifies danger, because in Libya there were some men we saw sold. They tied red pieces of cloth around their hands. Cry. I cried and encouraged myself not to always cry in every hard situation that I found myself in and will continue to find myself in. Boss. I didn't know anybody. I was 16 years old. We were many in the bus. Soldiers asked for money. They said if the woman who said she would pay for me didn't pay, there would be no water, and they would leave us in the desert to die. Without water, I saw one woman die and be buried in the sand. The boss said he wouldn't move, so another one came. It was a very bad situation being in Libya. I had gone to Kano for work, but there was no work. And the woman said, "Come with me. I'm going to Libya where there is work." Their writing was strong. It was nonfiction in a way that makes much nonfiction fiction because of forcing contingencies into rational order. The Nigerian women's stories were vivid with photographic details. There was disintegration, no real plot, no climax, nothing, though, really needed to be added. The violence, the integrity, the human condition, the corruption needed no other voices to frame or interpret their months of being caught between uncertain borders as women whose resources were largely faith, crying, dominating deeper and deeper fears, and finding a few human beings to trust as they made a passage through hell. Research for writers remained to be done. Research on the way the camps worked in Libya, the way payments worked, the way rival groups took possessions of the refugees and trafficked them. But the life stories held up on their own voices, and details kept so carefully folded inside. The days and nights were hard to touch. Often slithery terror surfaced on their faces in the library. It was difficult to put one's mind back into the conditions, choices, and options. They talked because these memories were part of their lives, and someone asked them about what was waiting to be told. The choked silence inside the room was met by the silence welcoming them into the room.
Lovely. That's lovely. Umneya had wanted to say something. Umneya, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody, and very nice to meet Wallis and her ideas and nice writing. And it's very nice also to know that she has an immunologist friend, because I do believe that in this world, among all these changes we are facing, words can have a wonderful neutralizing effect. We are passing through a lot. We cannot interpret everything we can see, but definitely silence helped me a lot to understand and to interpret, especially after meeting people from different nationalities and after facing a lot of changes in my own country, Egypt. I feel that words and understanding others can play a very important role in neutralizing anger and fear. And if we can express ourselves more in good ideas from expats, this can help a lot in creating new possibilities, because it takes time to understand what's happening, and definitely it takes time to understand others. When I meet a British or American or Italian, it takes a lot to understand them, to chit chat with them, to know how they move toward their ideas. And hearing you today, that you listened a lot to the trees, and the trees took you a lot through history, and this helped you a lot to interpret silence and to formulate it into words. This is amazing. And even if you can pass this experience to younger, it will help them understand what's going on. If you can put these ideas to doctors, maybe they will understand their work better, because a lot of doctors know, and I'm a hematologist myself, and I know that we are carrying changes through literature and through social interaction that carries a lot of better future for us. So I think Amani too knows this truth, and she's working hard on her digital platform to give us this hope for better future. And I'm happy that you are doing the same. And now we are having a very nice friend, immunologist, who is going to help you a lot if you can put things into nice words to be read and interpreted. Doctors can understand this, and they can have a better platform to work for the future. This is one of my interpretation for this nice meeting. Another thing that I do believe among nationalities, when idea is created and accepted, it will market itself in this new world. And another thing from what happened, and I used to hear that Americans says, going into history, it's fun. I don't know how it is fun, because in Egypt, it's not. But if you have an idea how going to history is fun for American, and it is not for Egyptian, I would be so grateful for you. Another thing I would ask more about the voice and the authority, because in Egypt, our authority is totalitarians, but I don't know how you can define authorities in your world. This I want to ask you about. And of course, the Ukrainian problem. And I want to suggest that to think about the Ukrainian-Russian problem as an immunological problem. It might help a lot to understand what is the problem between two countries who used to know each other and to live with each other. And all of a sudden, a blast happened because of autoimmunity. Why Ukraine are not accepting Russians and the reverse? It's not a matter of energy or money or power. I think if we think about the problem on immunological basis, we can explain a lot of what's happening, especially that media does not cover all the perspectives. And thank you very much.
Oh, so many ideas. That's what we get from listening to each other, you know, really. Thank you.
And I should just say, Wallis and I have already been talking about her talking to at least women in academic medicine.
True. Yeah, I've taught a lot of doctors. I've lived through literature.
I feel compelled to share this just because it was so recent. My daughter just finished her psychiatric residency and graduated last night. That's not what the story is about. The story goes to me being there last night, and early this morning, she shared a book with me that was a personal story about a family that was struck very, almost completely, all of their children, I think they had 12 children, I was reading the preface, about their story with schizophrenia. So I was thinking about this on the way back, 4-hour drive, typical American little trip there. But I was thinking about it on the way back, and I thought, how cool that this wonderful writer, he's a lovely writer. I have to find I'd have to find the book, but how this is going to connect all of it, because I'm able to understand in layman's terms what my daughter tries to understand on her job. It links, what it really links is generations when you have stories. I saw a generational link there that may not have been able to happen. And looking at the emotional side of her job is so more easily understood, because we can talk about this book. We can talk about this journey that a family had, and that's her perspective. And all of this is just really, it's so important, especially in the medical profession. We have a couple of doctors in the family, and I'm trying to create in Parma an exchange that had already existed, but it's going to be pared down to American students and Italian students exchanging experiences on site. And the American students coming to Italy have to have a B1 level of Italian before they can even do the experience. So it's not something they're going to buy. It'll be something that they will earn by learning enough Italian to participate in these shadowing experiences. So I'm looking to offer that. And when I've done these kinds of exchanges before, these placements in Parma, the most wonderful things came out of their blogs, their stories that they told. You know, it wasn't a baby being born, it was an Albanian woman who was so happy to be resettled, and all of the people that celebrated with her. And those were the kinds of things that came out in these students' blogs. It brought the humanities back to their experiences, because they were writing it for me, and I'm not a medical professor. I was the one saying, okay, tell me how you felt. And that's where I see the narration that, you know, we experience with Wallis, because of her international understanding and her way of weaving those together so beautifully. You know, she was straight up mentor for me. So I just wanted to share that because it just happened. I just, you know, just got the book. So it was kind of uncanny that, you know, the medical profession is represented, and it's so cool. So.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's fantastic that we have participants from so many different places, and we can share our experiences this readily and in a very natural way. Any other thoughts?
I have a request.
Rod, you were, yeah, you're about to say something?
Hello, everybody. Hello, Wallace. How are you?
Hi, Rad.
Hello. I'm always happy listen to your webinars or your lectures or teachings. I have just one question, or maybe I have an equation that I can't solve, and I want to share this with you, and I hope that if you can help me to find the solution for this equation. I feel that emotions are the first enemy for us. Maybe in some difficult periods of that we face, if we listen to our emotions, that will maybe stop us, or maybe that can kill us. But later, when all these difficulties vanish or be behind us, emotions, well, this is the first thing that we have to listen to them. So what do you think?
Good red question. Sure, I think the word is listen, really. Listening means we stop. We stop talking, at least, and we listen, and we absorb, figure it out. And I think, yes, I mean, feelings too, as you know, they're terrible feelings, awful feelings. We have to listen to those, perhaps in the sense that we have to identify them. I'm not sure we have to listen to them in the sense of act upon them. And each thing has there's so much dialectic between back and forth, but sure, identifying feelings by listening to feelings and then figuring out what to do with those feelings, where they fit, whether they require actions, whether they're blocking you from actions, all that stuff is, and I think in writing, in the end, we need feelings to care enough to write. And, we probably need to reveal some feelings to have readers care about reading the material. It has to have something that moves us. Does that answer your question? No, it doesn't.
A little bit, but this is something that maybe we can walk together for my project.
That's it. That's it.
Mary was about to say something.
It's just, I quickly want to thank Wallis for her poetry and Silence and Silences and all the other books. But please include the busts in your next collection.
Oh.
The busts, because I'm a 85-year-old badger living in Portland, and I really got a kick out of that one. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks. I wrote that in Geneva.
Yes, that's where I heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Mohammed.
Well, anyone have any last thoughts? We're approaching our time limit. In that case, I can.
I'll say hi. I just want to say that Wallis has been the most incredible guiding light to me, and her writing and her very being are so enlightening and so special. And I'm sorry I haven't seen her since the many years ago we were friends at Stanford, but I cherish her friendship. And right now I'm in a Himalayan fair in Berkeley looking for my daughter, but you can see
Wow.
there is a lot of Himalayan dancing and music going on. Anyhow, I have to say goodbye, but thank you. It was a beautiful, beautiful talk and interview. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you for participating. Oh, now we have Olja and then Ahmed.
We have Seth.
Oh, Seth.
Well, I was just going to write Wallis an email on this, but on emotion, I can't, I don't want to let this go. This is a group of people interested in writing. And it seems to me when you're talking about messages, I could approach this in many different ways, but what we don't like about messages is that they're tweets, they're short statements that elicit emotion. But all writers know how to manipulate words to elicit emotions. And it seems to me that writers have a responsibility to, at some point, to teach readers how they're being manipulated. And because the link between words and arousal is so great, and yet something that in literature classes is not discussed, in writing classes is not discussed, although we know very much about the physiological mechanisms that lie behind this. And I think that the only way long-term that we can get people to dismiss messages and look for truth in some way is if we can tell them, stop, look at that message, look at how it's manipulating your emotions. Does that mean it's truth, or does it mean it's just generated a response from you? And my message to writers is that they have to think about their audiences, and that audiences are not well equipped to measure the meaning of messages.
Thanks. That's a very good, very good message to give to all of us. And I do think that writing, as it's too, has fallen more and more into the hands of publishers and bestsellers. Writing books has become more to stay on message, to which are already predicted what people, how they'll respond and why they'll buy it. And I must say, in Silences, there's that part even at the beginning where it sort of reminds the reader at several points they're in a book that's an illusion, sort of like you think this is, oh, I repeated this line, but really this is because you're reading, but I've done it on purpose. And a writer chooses what to put in and what to leave out and how to create an illusion, which means they have a triple responsibility in terms of writing towards a higher sense of truth, a sense of something that's going to illuminate people in some way, and not just give them a thrill, as you say, give them a message, give them a temporary high, Thanks.
Well, the next time we meet, we can discuss it even more. But I think that's why I like your writing, okay, is because at some level, it's very, very honest. And it isn't necessarily trying to manipulate me. It's trying to give me some wisdom, some insight that I wouldn't have had from my own experience. Although the experiences that we share as Midwesterners, I think are dear to me because I don't know how we ever move out of the Midwest and live with the rest of the world, but it's okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Brilliant. We have Ahmed.
Hello, everyone. Well, first, I'd like to thank Wallis for sharing her thoughts and experiences with us. It's enriching. By the way, I like your name. Reminds me of William Wallace. And I have a request and a question. Let me start with the request. I'm writing a memoir about my 20 years experience as a quadriplegic.
It's a
quadriplegic.
Legic.
No, quadriplegic.
I can't hear the word. Could you show yourself? I'm sort of a lip reader.
Quadriplegic. Quadriplegic.
That's
Okay.
right. Oh, well, is my voice reaching you? Well,
Yes,
Yeah.
it's clear. It's good, Ahmed. It's good.
It's
okay. Okay. So I'm wondering if you can give me some tips to make it to the point.
Well,
Let me explain. Ahmed is writing a memoir about his personal experience and about his accident and about how he was before the accident and how he managed to put his life together after the accident. So he is asking you for advice about how to do that in a very concise way, how to get to the point and not to get, distracted in all the different details.
Yes, that's my request. And I have a question too. How was you received in Russia in 91? And what was the outcome?
okay, well, let me speak to your point. Ahmed, I think it's very brave if you want to write a memoir about your experience. Personally, I think these stories, one thing you can think about is it doesn't have to be told from the beginning to the end. And two, it can easily start in the middle. You can take us, let's go, I can give you the easiest example in that case is Dante. Dante starts in the middle where he collapses. He finds himself in a wood, it's passed out. And then he takes a journey. And the whole book, though, is written by a voice which is already returned from the journey. And so, I mean, he's been to paradise and returned. And so the book starts in the middle. The person who's telling the story has already completed the journey that he's describing. So in some way, a useful place maybe to at least start your story, why you're telling it, who's telling it, which part of you is telling it, and where is that part in time? And you can, there's a wonderful French memoir called Childhood, written by Natalie Serrault, who she writes she's 90 years old when she writes her book, or 85, and it's called Childhood. And she puts on one page, she describes a little event. She's playing on a merry-go-round and she reaches for the ring. And the person on the other page is the 85-year-old persona author who's speaking to that child and said, was that the day your father left you? Was that the day that you realized you were going to move? And she creates a dialogue. You have a very fluid set of possibilities in terms of, but one of your main issues is really who's telling the story and at what point in time. I don't know if that helps you, but it would be my thought.
Yes, it does. It does so much. Actually, I started from the middle, the point when the accident happened. But what you just said right now opened new horizons to investigate and try to reach a path to follow while writing the memoir. Thank you.
Because the accident may be the defining point, but I've worked with enough people to think that you think it's the defining point, but maybe who you are now is the defining point, and maybe that's what you start from. I don't know. I don't know enough. I'm just trying to give you some ideas. It's very flexible and extremely important to figure out where the story that you're telling begins and where it's going. And it can begin at any point that you decide is the beginning.
Well, I picked the accident because I consider it a turning point.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it is a turning point. It's right after it when my personality started to develop more and change. It's right after it because everything just changed from one end to the other.
Exactly. A poet, Transtimer, who won the Nobel Prize a few years ago, he had an accident which meant he lost the power of speech, and you might look at some of his essays, which are very readable, and see how he absorbs the event and how he narrates it. It begins to change him exactly because he becomes somebody who he can remember the other person, but basically he very much accepts the person he becomes.
Thank you so much. But may I ask, is it possible to get in contact with you to get all these references? Can I email you?
Yeah, ask Mohammed. I have a website, and if you send me something to the website, I can pick up your email from there.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Well, good luck on your work.
Now the question: how were you received in Russia, and what was the outcome?
Well, I don't want to run Mohammed's program beyond where it's supposed to go or to hold people. Russia, if you read Silences, actually I described something in Russia. It was a very profound experience, and it's extremely sad that Russia has been unable to really step forward from that moment when things collapsed. They needed to build so many institutions. They needed to write so many laws. They didn't have a justice system. They didn't even have defense lawyers. They had to look outside for people who would write their history. Those were all questions. That just infinite numbers of things. It was an intense time. And I remember, the main thing I remember is how frightened and discouraged people were. It wasn't like they were being given freedom. It was like a system was collapsing. And I can identify with that. I can identify, unless you've asked for this freedom yourself and fought for it, it probably, at least at the beginning, is an unknown. That's a burden. You lose your pension, you lose the support, maybe you won't have, etc. It was a profound experience, and I was grateful for meeting students and some people who had just incredible courage in terms of wanting to go forward and build a different world.
Thank you so much. I'll do my best to read your book at the first chance.
Oh, thanks. Anyway, good luck for your own work.
Thank you so much, Wallis.
Sure.
Well, I think that's a good note to end. There's always hope. Since we've come to the end of our time, I would like to thank you all for this very enjoyable conversation, and in particular Wallis. I think personally I've learned a lot and I've enjoyed this very much.
I have too, Mohammed. You're very gifted too, and a gifted writer, and we didn't get to talk about your work at all. But thank you for you and Amani, all the work you do on this site. So,
Thank you.
thanks.